This is the Brisbane Lions Big Footy podcast with Keegs and Ollie, and today we're joined by Michael Whiting, who's the AFL.com.au reporter for Queensland, and he will talk to us all about Josh Schache's contract situation, Tom Rockliff, Chris Fagan and his first impressions on him as a coach, Tayla Harris, the Springfield training admin facility, and all other Brisbane Lions related news. Let's get into it. All right, welcome, Ollie, to episode 8. We're up to now of the Big Footy Lions podcast. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, really good, Keegs. Thanks for having me on again. And yeah, we had the special guest Daniel Merritt join us last week, and we got another one this week as well. So looking forward to it.
Yep, big shoes to fill. Michael Whiting on the phone with us, AFL.com reporter for the Brisbane Lions and the Gold Coast Suns. How you going, mate?
Hey, Keegs. Hey, Ollie. I'm not... they are big shoes to fill. Dan Merritt, he's a funny man and very knowledgeable. I had to listen to him last week, so I'll see how I go.
He was quality. He loved his stories. But as we spoke about before, we're just going to, I suppose, touch in with you, talk about the headlines that are following the Lions at the moment, and we'll continue to follow the Lions throughout the year. So the big talking point, I guess, is Josh Schache, who's out of contract at the end of this year. It's a familiar tale for Lions with their top draft picks and I guess the ongoing contract saga. How do you see things on that front with him?
Yeah, it is. Every Lions fan seemingly almost every year, isn't it, that there's a top 10 pick that's got a question mark over his contract status. But I'm not overly sure about Josh at the moment. I don't think he is, from what I can understand. He's been pretty quiet publicly, but the club, I don't think the club's going to sell the farm to try and keep Josh, and I think Josh has got to figure out, whether he really wants to stay and whether he sees a future here. And I think that's what every 18 and 19-year-old kid has to figure out in their first 2 years at the club. But I don't think there doesn't seem a real, not that there's not an urgency, but the club certainly isn't panicking at this stage. We're only sort of 6 or 8 rounds in, and ideally you'd like to have something sorted out for peace of mind. But I don't think they're going to be hasty in throwing a heap of cash or throwing a huge contract at Josh at the moment. And by the same token, Josh has got to figure things out himself. So I think there's still a little way away from, I don't think they're far down the negotiation path, put it that way.
Yeah.
Does it become hard these days with the managers intervening? I think Lions fans probably see Josh staying just because his family ties to the club. His father played there. He grew up supporting the Lions. But, obviously the managers going out of their way to try and get the best deal for their players.
Yeah, of course they do. And, I think it's probably been well documented that the contract that Tom Boyd got a couple of years ago from the Bulldogs probably threw the equation out a bit for young key forwards. And everyone knows that you're going to get offered more money to go elsewhere. So I think that's going to be a reality. Josh is probably likely to get offers that exceed what Brisbane can offer him. That's just the nature of the business. If you're a club trying to lure someone away, you've got to offer them more money and or a longer contract. So he'll likely have to come to a decision of whether he wants to chase more money and possibly a longer contract, or whether he believes he sees a future in Brisbane. And I think we're only 6 months into the Chris Fagan, David Noble era. And I think he's probably weighing up, like everyone else, whether he thinks there's an exciting future ahead, which I'm sure the club's doing everything they can to prove that. So, I can understand both sides, really, and why it's not going to necessarily be a quick process.
You obviously watch the Lions regularly. Do you think the speculation and the negotiation process is something that's weighed down on Josh and maybe is affecting his performance? Because we have seen it in the past with other players.
Yeah, it could do. It's really hard to tell. There's so much expectation because he's a number 2 pick, and I don't think anyone thought he was a saviour. But as we know, key position players, and it's a cliche, they take time, and it's generally because that's the truth. I mean, they're not as strong as the guys they're playing against. They're not as quick. They've got a lot to learn. I think even when you watch Josh play, he's used to dominating under 18s, and now he's coming in to senior football, and he probably leads up and down the ground a bit. He sort of tends to play in straight lines from what I've seen, and he's probably got a fair bit to learn about his craft, but that's all part of his maturing. So I think you're only human to for that contract speculation or those offers to weigh down a little bit, but I don't think that's necessarily the be all and end all of his form issues at the moment.
I think what
he has been receiving.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
Yeah, he has been receiving a bit of criticism on social media. Do you think you go back to his first year and his stats as a first-year forward throughout history, really go back to all the big key forwards in their first year, his stats rack up pretty well. But do you think the criticism around him this year has been a bit unfair?
Oh, I do. Yeah, I think it's harsh because the other thing, I mean, his stats were very good last year, and he got a lot of opportunities. I think he played 16 of the first 17. You guys, I should know that off the top of my head, but I think he played 16 of the first 17 before they rested him. He kicked a goal a game, and he was coming up and taking marks up the ground. But the other thing, oppositions get to have a look at him now. I mean, no one would have put any time into Josh Schache last year, an opposition. They would have known he was a number 2 pick and done a little bit of underage scouting, but they wouldn't have known a lot about him, whereas now all of those fullbacks have had one game to learn.
Yeah, that's right.
What Josh's leading patterns and what he likes to do and where he gets the ball, and so you've got to factor that in as well. So I don't think it's that unusual for a key forward to battle in his second season, and the ball's not going in that often. It's 45 or 46 inside 50. So I think. His form's got to be held to account, but I think, criticism's probably a bit of a stretch.
I think some of that angst from the fans stems from, and it's not Josh's fault, it's just sheer comparison. Like, Eric Hipwood's a freak, but he was taken in the same draft as him. So fans sort of say, well, Eric's doing this, and this. Why isn't Josh at least doing this? And that's understandable, isn't it? I mean, like you say, they're right next to each other, so it's hard to not compare. And Eric's definitely made a bigger impression. Like he's, and I think the thing that I like, and I'm sure that you guys and the rest of the fans out there like, is Eric's attack on the contest. I think it was might have been in the last quarter the other day. The ball was seemingly landing in the middle of 3 Hawthorn players, and Eric made a contest and got to the contest and took a mark in the last quarter. Like, he really wanted the ball. So I think that's the thing that excites you. And Josh probably hasn't quite shown that same aggression. And I think from young guys, we all love seeing aggression, don't we? I think fans love seeing it, and journalists and the public love seeing that aggression. And Josh probably hasn't quite got the same level of that aggression that Eric's got. All right, we'll move on to the next topic that we'd penned down, was Tommy Rockliff. So you would have no doubt wrote and heard about the speculation last year, trying to, or was he put on the trade table, or was he searching for other options? And now I guess he's sort of risen from the dead, and he was voted back into the leadership group as a vice captain, and now captaining again until the injury. How have you seen his turnaround and how things have changed on that front?
Oh, he's really put his head down. Like, I mean, I was as interested as anybody when Chris Fagan came in to see how that dynamic would work, and I think it's pretty well documented now that Chris had quite a few conversations with Tom, gave him a clean slate to start with, and I think to Tom's credit, he's really taken that opportunity. I think you'll notice this year he's got his head down and his bum up. Like, we've hardly heard a word from Tom in the media, and last year, every week, Tommy was popping up saying something and putting his foot in it or getting himself in trouble. Not so much off the field, but there was 1 or 2 indiscretions there that, that probably cost him. And this year, I think he's a little bit more settled. I've barely spoken to Tom myself, but, he seems a bit more settled. I know he's partner's due to have his first baby towards the end of the season, I think, in 4 or 5 months. So whether that's helped settle him off the field, I'm not quite sure. But his form on the field's been fantastic, and he's just putting his head down and being a leader to guys around the club and doing what he can on the field. So I'm really impressed so far, just with his discipline on and off the field so far.
It looked like he was almost gone at the end of last season, and obviously with the pending free agency at the end of this year, where do you see his future?
Yeah, it's tricky. I think it's. I'm probably sitting on the fence here a bit, guys, which is not what everyone wants to hear. I realise, but I was having a think about this before I had a chat to you guys, and I was thinking with David Noble coming into the club, he's been through this before with Patrick Dangerfield at Adelaide. Of course, Dave Noble was the footy manager at Adelaide.
Yeah, good point.
And now at the Lions. Yeah, so he's been through that with Paddy Dangerfield. And I mean, Tommy, understandably, last year saw some quite lengthy contracts being thrown around at the Lions. I think Daniel Rich and Steph Martin and these guys got lengthy contracts, and Tommy probably thought he'd put his, understandably would put his hand out and see if he could get something similar. So not quite sure where the club's at as far as that goes at the moment, but I think the club will be keen to keep him at the moment. Yeah, and I think at the moment Tom would be keen to stay. A lot can happen though, and it might depend. I mean, obviously it's going to depend on what offers he gets from elsewhere. I mean, he's been around for his ninth season, I think. So he'd understandably want to see a pathway to success in the next few years, because he's not towards the end of his career, but he's in the back half. So if you're Tommy Rockliff, you certainly want to see a pathway to success in the next 3 or 4 years. And if the club can show him that, I reckon he'd be pretty keen to stay. Yeah,
for sure. It was quite ironic that it was his shoulder that gave way, because he's certainly been shouldering the load for the Lions this year.
His form's been terrific, hasn't it? I mean, week in and week out, he might have had one down game possibly, but his clearance work and his contested footy, and I mean, he's often criticised for not being able to take games over, but I think a lot of that gets blown out of proportion to him, and he wins so much hard ball. I think he wins it in tight, and you really want guys on the outside to be able to take advantage. He's a smart footballer, Tommy, and I think Brisbane's much better when he's in their team, no doubt.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to do everything we can to cling on to him, because it'd be going further backwards next year if we lost him.
Yeah, I agree,
his clearance work's been unbelievable. 16 again on the weekend. He's just been amazing.
Yeah.
Around the ball.
And I think
it is amazing when you think, sorry guys, just when you think every club does so much work around stoppages. Every coach every week emphasises how important stoppages are, and for Tommy Rockliff to be streeting the rest of the AFL and the number of clearances he gets is pretty amazing.
Yeah, because he is streets in front as well. I think Rory Sloane was second, and he's had a few quiet weeks, so he's probably only getting further in front as well. I suppose before we move on the Rocky stuff, do you know any updates on the injury side of things, or is that still a bit unclear?
No, it's still a bit unclear. They should have an update by Tuesday afternoon, as far as I know. So I think they wanted to see how well it settled, because dislocated shoulders, as he had on Saturday, sometimes they can settle a bit. Sometimes they can settle quite quickly. So it doesn't look overly promising for this weekend's match, but you never know, but it doesn't look promising, no.
Certainly concerning coming up against the Adelaide team that you'd think would want to bounce back.
The Lions have copped a pretty unfortunate run of matches the past few weeks, playing Sydney, who'd been hammered in the media the week before, and then Hawthorn obviously had been struggling, and now Adelaide as well. So it's all experience, and I know that's a cliche, but really it's great for Chris Fagan to see what his team can do this year, because as far as I'm concerned, there's no huge expectation on what Chris Fagan can produce this year. So to see how his team performs under duress and against top quality oppositions, invaluable for him.
Speaking of the great man, how have you seen things since he has come to the club? I suppose not only on the field but off the field as well.
Yeah, I've been really impressed. The first few months, I was probably like anyone, sort of in and around and dealing with the club. I was interested to see how he'd operate, and I found him. I wouldn't say standoffish, but he probably had no reason to be overly chummy with the journalists around town. But I found as the season got underway, he's sort of settled into his role. With us, with the media. He's very engaging. He's a very thoughtful fellow, and I've spoken to a lot of players in the last 6 months, and there's just a consistent theme that he cares about players on the field and off the field. He's very inclusive. That teaching background, which people always refer to, seems to be a common theme that comes out when you speak to players, that they enjoy the way he gives feedback. It can be even when he's got a criticism, it's delivered in a manner that players seem to respond to. So I think his delivery and his message is certainly having an impact with the players, and it's just going to take a bit of time. I think when you're a new coach and you've got 45 people to try and win over on a playing list and teach a new way of playing. It's just going to take time, but I'm super, super impressed, and I think I genuinely believe Brisbane's in good hands.
Yeah, and a bit of the blame towards our struggles over the last few years has been towards the training facility and the lack of training facilities, and it's just been an ongoing issue now for a number of years. Where's everything at with Springfield and the new training base?
Yeah, it sounds like Springfield's getting pretty close, actually. I spoke to a couple of people at the club last week. They've done a good job this time, the club, in keeping it sort of under wraps and
well, I think they jumped the gun a few times.
Yeah,
It's a big burn.
Yeah, they have. So they've done a really good job in keeping it quiet. I know the board's done a lot of work behind the scenes and understandably tried to keep it quiet because, like you said, it's they've probably been made to look silly a few times in the last 3 or 4 years. But it does sound like Springfield's pretty close, actually. And I know people have their thoughts on that, but obviously, I think it'd be, from a Lions perspective, it'd be great to have everything in the one area of, as you mentioned off the top, I deal with Gold Coast Suns, and they've been training at a tin sheds for 6 years, and it's a bit different for them because their facility's on site and that's at Metricon, so it's obviously a lot more convenient, but just having everything in the one area. So if the Lions get the green light for Springfield, they'll have their training fields, they'll have their gym, they'll have their pools, they'll have their admin, everything will be on the one site. So it'd just be so much better for players and staff rather than having to drive to Cooperoo for training, drive to the Gabba for weights, and drive elsewhere to see doctors. And it's just, it'd be so much better. And I know it's a little bit away from the Gabba, but if it goes ahead, it'd be a huge win.
So you did talk about some concerns that fans might have. And I suppose one is a conflict of interest because Bob Sharpless obviously has ties to the Springfield area. And secondly, I guess, players that move to Brisbane sort of allocate themselves in and around the city, and having to go out to Springfield might be a concern for them or a bit of a frustration. Yeah. Do you think they're legitimate problems, or is it not?
Yeah, I understand. I understand certainly the Bob Sharpless's ties, but from what I can gather, I'm not 100% certain on this, but I'm not sure how much longer Bob will be on the board for at the Lions. So I think, if there's a change there, that might alleviate an issue in that regards. But there's probably a bit to play out there. As far as the travel goes, I can understand why people might have their concerns, but really it's probably half an hour. I understand there's probably traffic, but maybe half an hour. And I mean, maybe I'm being a bit flippant here, but I just think if people are whinging about half an hour drive to work, I mean, I think if you did a survey, all those fans that think, it might be an issue, the amount of people that travel 30 and 45 and 60 minutes to work every day would probably scoff at the notion of having to travel that far. And I think what will happen over time is that new draftees to the club, that they just won't know any better. They'll be drafted, and that's where the Lions.
That's true.
That's where their home base is, and I think what might happen is instead of all the players living in the suburbs closer to the Gabba, like a lot of them live in, Camp Hill, Morningside, Hawthorn, Balimba, whatever, that might just eventually migrate over to suburbs a bit closer to Springfield over time. But I personally don't think it's a huge issue. I mean,
it's just the fans' Yeah. It's just the fans' concerns in comparison with St Kilda, and they went out to Seaford. And now they've gone back to Moorabbin again, and we've heard of a few players not too happy about the trip out there. But it seems like it would be the way to go with all the facilities in the one spot. And if players are already travelling to Coorparoo and other places as it is now, then it makes sense to have it all in the one spot, surely.
Yeah, well, that's the thing I think. Like, I understand. I'm not trying to be dismissive of it, and I'm certainly not just pro club by any stretch of the imagination. But I just think of, I mean, even in my own instance, I'm travelling down the Gold Coast a number of times a week to go to work, and I don't really think it's a hassle. And I'm sure half the public out there think the same. But if you want these facilities and players, not too many players have publicly whinged about them, but obviously the facilities at the Gabba are a little bit outdated, and if you want new facilities and you have to drive 20 or 30 minutes for them, I think that little journey will far out what, the what's at the other end. Brand new facilities will far outweigh the extra bit of driving that players have got to do.
I think that's part of the point as well. Like, Brisbane's facilities are just so outdated that anything's better than nothing at this point. So
yeah. I certainly think. I think that's true, and I think Mitch Robinson, maybe a year or two ago, referred to the facilities at the Gabba as the dungeon, and he might have got a bit of backlash from the club about that, but it's probably on the money. And I know people will say, and there's some truth to the fact that weights are weights. They'll weigh the same wherever they are, but it's pretty nice to have everything in the one area and brand new facilities, and it's obviously a nice selling point to players if you're trying to recruit guys.
I think at one point someone said that they can't actually fit everyone in the gym at the one time either. You sort of have to have sessions.
Yep.
Yeah. So that's another factor as well, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the Brisbane's list is so young now as well. I would imagine that. I haven't asked a lot of the senior players. I haven't asked any of the senior players actually, but you can understand if senior players were used to driving 5 minutes to the Gabba and then all of a sudden had to make the journey out to Springfield. It might be a bit of an annoyance. But if you're a young player and you're fresh to the club, and you don't know any better, I don't think it's going to be a problem.
Well, before we wrap up today, just thought we'd get your thoughts on how we're travelling generally and what you think the rest of the season holds for us. Obviously, we've only got one win on the board at this point, but what are your thoughts on how we're playing and what we can look forward to in the back half of the year?
Yeah, I always thought, even at the start of this year, that it was going to be a year of few victories. I thought Brisbane would sort of remain in the bottom 3 or 4 teams, and it looks like it's going to remain that way. I had a good look at the statistics today, actually, and it's amazingly to me, because by the eye test, I think Brisbane's been a lot better, but a lot of the statistics are very similar to last year, which really surprised me, actually. I think they're conceding maybe 11 or 12 points less, which is a small step forward. But I think the footy, I don't know what you guys think, but I feel like the footy's been a lot better from Brisbane. They're still making mistakes. They've got almost an identical list to last year. Yeah. Aside from the Hugh McCluggage, Jared Berry, and 1 or 2 games from a couple of other draftees, but pretty much the same list. So you're going to have occasionally you'll have the same problems with turning the ball over. But I feel like they're defensively set up a little bit better. They're certainly a lot more accountable, I think, from the games I've watched live this year. Defensively, a lot more accountable, but it's just the probably the continuing errors with the ball. I guess poor disposal that's killed Brisbane a lot this year. So I don't think there's going to be a huge amount of wins in the second sort of 2/3 of the season, but I think you should still expect, I guess more consistent footy as they get to know what Chris Fagan wants, as every player gets to understand their role a bit better.
I think something that's been different from the last few years, and it's something we've talked about a lot, is those one-off quarters that they just absolutely blitz the opposition, like that one against the Bulldogs, that first quarter against the Gold Coast. They had a pretty good one against Essendon from memory as well. You just didn't get
third quarter, I think.
Yeah, you just didn't get any of those signs in 2016. It was sort of like you'd hang in a game for a quarter and then you just stop. So I think that you can actually see some upside now. Like, as you said, the results are pretty similar, but the good's actually pretty good.
Yeah, and I also think the ability to hang in, and I know Chris Fagan's probably made a point once or twice about trying to stop runs of goals, but I think, last year there was multiple games where Brisbane just rolled over. And lost by 80 or 100 points, and we haven't. There's been one or two. The match against Port was pretty poor. I thought they played poorly against Richmond as well. But generally speaking, the Sydney game a couple of weeks ago, I know Dan spoke about that on your show last week, but that could have been easily could have been 100-point loss. And people can say, the game was over at quarter time, but it wasn't. And Brisbane showed that they fought it out and were reasonably level in the last three quarters. And I think that fighting spirit is something we've seen a lot more of this year. You can see what they're trying to do with the ball. They're trying to be aggressive. The skills haven't quite caught up with the method at the moment, but I think there's enough there to be positive about.
Ollie, have you got anything else?
Yeah, just probably going on, just those quarters here and there. It works in our favour as well. We've had those really good quarters against Essendon and Gold Coast and the Bulldogs, but what's letting us down is probably just that consistency and just those really bad quarters here and there as well, just totally costing us. Like, probably Port Adelaide, that first quarter and a bit, we're blown away and the game was over. But after that, I thought we hung in there okay.
Yeah, I thought Port and Sydney
was a terrible loss in the end, but in the Sydney game as well, exactly right.
They were pretty similar.
First quarter. Yeah.
You know what? With each passing week, it makes me realise how much we dropped the ball in that Essendon game. Like, that was a real big opportunity that we've just absolutely bundled.
Yeah.
But
it was. Yeah, and when you're a struggling team, you don't get a lot of opportunities through the season, do you?
Yeah.
When you want to cling to every win you can, every win you can get. But I think you can see, like, as you boys have touched on some of the positives there, and it's really hard to cling to that sometimes, I think, when you're a fan. But there's a lot of, you can see the path forward for Brisbane now. I think there's certainly a unity within the group. You can see what they're trying to do with the ball, and I think you can see a lot more accountability and a lot more structure sort of defensively as well. So there's a path forward. Unfortunately, it's just going to take a fair amount of time, I think.
I think, to Brisbane's credit, what they've done right about this rebuild, we've had a few rebuilds since 2003, but this one, I think they've started with the spine first, which is something we've just been missing in previous years. So if we can keep them together, which is always a big if with Brisbane, the future looks pretty good.
Helps when a couple of your spines from Queensland, doesn't it?
Yeah, for sure. And
does.
Another one coming in next year as well.
Yeah, exactly. So I know everyone's excited about Connor Ballenden, but just want to make a mention of Harris Andrews. I know.
Yeah.
I can't believe his improvement this year. Like, I always, like most people, seeing him the first couple of years, had high hopes for him and was really excited about his ability to intercept mark and read the play. But his one-on-one defence this year has really surprised me. He's taking the biggest forward every week, and a lot of Jared Ruffhead on the weekend, and I'm I'm just so impressed with what he's done this season with his one-on-one defence and his ability to lead that young back line. Just an incredible improvement for a guy that's still only 20.
It's pretty unfortunate that someone like Jack Frost hasn't kicked on like we would have wanted, because then it would sort of leave Harris a bit more open to be more of an interceptor rather than, just the spoil first defender. Yeah. Which comes back to the point of losing Justin Clark was a real kick in the guts a few years ago.
Yeah, it certainly was. And I think you're right. Like, ideally, down the line, Harris Andrews will be, like an Alex Rance or a Stephen May or someone that can possibly play on the second or even third if they can unearth a couple more defenders, the second or third best forward, and can run off and intercept mark and create, because he's great intercept mark, and he's a pretty smart user with the ball as well. But at the moment, like, he's just rounding out his game nicely to be able to defend first and then create. It's a pretty great combination for a kid that's so young.
God help us where we'd be without Harris, but thankfully we've got him. Just one that popped into my head. We didn't actually highlight this as a talking point, but Tayla Harris is obviously or wants to move on. Have you got any take on that situation, Mike, and was that a surprise for you?
Yeah, it was a big surprise for me, actually. I suppose initially it certainly surprised me, because I think the clubs, looked after Tayla, and she was a big part of that first season of the AFLW. Like, she was pretty much the face of the Lions for a lot of the season and was a pretty instrumental player. She had a job at the club. In the club's media and communications department there for a while, so I know she's really highly valued, but I think Taylor's obviously very marketable.
Yeah.
She's a pretty big name in the women's game, so I guess when I stood back and took a bit more of a look at it, I'm maybe not as shocked as I was initially that she might want to get to the centre of the centre of the AFL world, if we can call it that.
Yeah, the big city lights.
Melbourne. Yeah, the big city lights of Melbourne. So initially I was shocked, but when I stood back and thought about it, maybe not so much. But it would be disappointing for Brisbane to lose her, that's for sure, because she's an exciting player, and she's really, really exciting to watch.
It's quite frustrating with how the system's set up at the moment, because we're going to lose her, but there's not much we stand to gain, because you look at draft picks and we sort of can only draft Queensland players, and players aren't earning that much money in the AFLW, so they're not going to throw their hand up to move interstate. So
yeah, exactly. It's a really delicate balance for the AFLW at the moment, isn't it? Just the way the competition's set up, and I think the first few years it's going to be all about trying to create more depth in the playing ranks, which probably isn't quite there at the moment. So when you lose one of your marquee players, it's a massive hole to fill, that's for sure.
Ollie, was there anything else you wanted to touch on before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think we've about covered it tonight.
Yeah, it's been a longer one, so thanks for your patience with us, Mike. It's been great to grab your insight on all things Brisbane. Hopefully you've got some better footy to look forward to in the second half of the year. Haven't had too much great news to report on or watch in your time reporting on Queensland footy, but hopefully you don't have to sit through too many more thumpings and thrashings.
No, it'd be nice to cover some winners, as I'm sure you guys would love to watch a few more winning performances, wouldn't you? So
that's for sure.
Hopefully starting on Saturday night against Adelaide.
We're not too hopeful, but we like your optimism.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the good thing about footy. You never know, especially this season. This season's been pretty crazy. I've been a horrendous tipster this season, so
it has been a hard one.
Never quite know. Very, very difficult, but I'm sure the Crows will be pretty desperate after their losing the past couple of weeks. But fingers crossed for a better back half of the season for Brisbane anyway.
Yeah, we're certainly hopeful. All right, well, that wraps up this episode. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Mike.